the intent for today is to really take advantage of this group, to talk to the team, to answer questions, both questions that you've asked us, that you sent to us in the survey that you completed after Labinar 1. And also, we're going to open it up to just ask questions. So you can certainly feel free to raise your hands and ask, or to note them in the chat box. Before we move into our actual Q&A, let me just introduce my colleagues. So we've got with us today Michael Corley. Yes, Rick Yoakum referred to him as one of the troublemakers. So Michael is with the Patterson Foundation. We also have with us today my partner in crime at No Margin, No Mission, Larry Clark. Abby Rowland is with us. She is a fellow at the Patterson Foundation, and also Josephine Eisenberg, who, again, we thank you, Josephine, for coordinating all the logistics for today. I'm going to just ask Abby if you could share just a few of our Zoom housekeeping updates, Abby. That would be great.
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. Just a couple of Zoom housekeeping. It looks like most people are already rocking the mute button, so we would encourage you to stay on mute if you're not speaking. That would be great. If you could change your name on Zoom to your name and your organization's name, that way we can kind of identify not only who you are, but where you're coming from. So you can do that through entering the participants tab at the bottom of your screen. Scrolling over your name, there should be a blue more button. And if you click that, and the drop down will have rename. So I see, so I have mine up, a couple of people getting theirs up. Great. If you have any trouble with that, just pop a note to either Josephine or myself in the chat, and we're happy to point out how to do that. How to ask questions. So we'd encourage you again to use the chat box to share. A lot of you are already doing that, which is great. So if you have comments or questions, feel free to pop them in there. We also encourage you, if you have a question, to raise your hand electronically on Zoom. So to do that, you'll go back down to that control panel at the bottom. There's a button called Reactions, and you should be able to see the raise hand function in there. So if you have a question and you'd like to ask it out loud, please feel free to raise your hand. Looks like Mike just did so. So awesome. Thanks, Mike. And finally, we will be recording this session, so it will be available for you to see afterwards as well. So thank you. Now I'm going to hand it over to Josephine to take a photo.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I am going to give me 1 second. I'll give you a heads up to smile. I'm going to take 2 pictures just so I make sure that they turn out right. Actually, it's going to be a few because I have you on 2 different screens. So I'll say smile, then I'll say relax, and we'll do it just a few times and then we'll move on. So give me a second just to set up my screen. Can start. And if your video's off, and if by any chance you're willing to turn it on, that would be great for the photo. Here we go. Let me see a big smile and relax. I'm going to do the same thing again. Another big smile and relax. One more time. Actually, 2 more. Okay, again, 1 more. Good one, smile. Okay, perfect. That's all we need. I got everyone. Thank you, guys. Welcome.
Beautiful. Thank you, Josephine. So before we get started, let's just spend a couple of minutes recapping our first session, the Labinar. So for those of you who had joined us a week ago, we really spent an hour talking about what we call mission-informed, economically aligned decision-making. And this whole idea that if you look at your organization's own decision-making through a mission-focused lens, and then add to that an economic-informed lens, this idea that you can make better informed decisions within your organization starts to percolate. And that's really what the focus for Advancing Mission Thrivability is all about. So during that first webinar, we really spent time talking about mission-focused decision-making. And next week at webinar number 2, we'll add on to that this lens of economically informed decision-making. And then we're going to sort of merge the two. So coming out of that first webinar, we had asked you to complete a survey and to share your questions with us in that survey. And I'm happy to report that we received lots and lots of good questions. So we've taken some time prior to this Webversation to think about those questions and then to give some nice responses to them during today. And that's what we'd like to start. And we'll go through those questions just one at a time. Please feel free to chime in if you have any comments or add-ons to those questions as we go. Just raise your hand or note them in the chat box, and we will address those as we go. And then, as I said, once we get through those questions, we'll open it up to any other questions that you all may have. So with that, why don't we jump in and get started? I'm gonna ask the first question and share our response. And here's what the question was. It was, how can we take an idea like mission-centric decision-making and make it something very practical? And then the second part to that question is, what are practical ways that we can put into practice some of the ideas we've heard in webinar number 1? So, good question. A couple of thoughts here. So the first thing that we would say is thinking about your own organization. Do you have, or have you set previously, mission goals for each of your activities, your programs, your products, and your services? And we start there because frequently executive directors, CEOs, staff members will tell us, no, we didn't actually set mission-focused goals for those programs, activities, products, and services. So if you haven't done that, that's a very good starting point. What do you want? What do you want each of them to achieve in terms of mission impact? If you have done that, that's great. And that's a good starting point as well for sort of this practical approach that we shared during webinar 1. So another thing to consider is that this idea of mission-centric decision-making, we gave an exercise during the first webinar, and it was a step-by-step exercise. We intentionally did that to make it practical and as user-friendly for your organization as it could be. So if you haven't gone through that step-by-step process that we outlined during the first webinar, we urge you to do that before next week's second webinar. You will find it very helpful because it really does help you sort of break down step-by-step what you should go through to think about what mission-centric decision-making looks like. So that's what we would urge you to do, to take an idea like mission-centric decision-making, to make it very practical and to be able to apply it to your own organization. So I'm not sure who asked that question, but does that answer your question? Or is there anything else that we might be able to offer up here that would be a helpful add-on? Anybody? Okay. Well, unless I didn't see any hands go up, Josephine or Abby, did you? No. Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions in the chat box for that one? No. Okay. Then let's go on to the second question. And Larry, I'm going to turn that one over to you.
Thanks, Mike. These series of questions we've kind of grouped into cope, adapt, and innovate, just for your information. there's a few different categories that we'll dive into. But the next question is, I would like to know how other organizations are transitioning into on-site and outreach events. So, I mean, as many of you know, you did events, you canceled your events last year. Some of you have canceled your events this year, but many of you are starting to, bring people back together again. Many of our client partners are doing that. It's limited in some cases, but pretty much the bottom line is it really is up to your clients, your customers, your patrons, your donors. What do they feel comfortable with? We have a number of organizations like Florida Cultural Group and Manatee Performing Arts Center, Charlotte Players, that are doing performances, but they have told us, and what they're finding is a lot of the patrons are waiting to come back. So, they have to balance that with what's their staffing configuration look like. Are they willing to still do the events? Are they limiting the events that they're doing? So, and the good news is that virtual events took place last year, and all of us became pretty good at handling Zoom and other forms of, virtual, sharing. And, we believe that that won't go away, that you'll still do some virtual events in the future because you've learned some really good skills in doing that. And so you'll probably, when things are all back to normal, still do on-site stuff, but you'll still do some virtual stuff at the same time. So, we've learned some new skills along the way. Questions? Thoughts? Okay, I will turn it over to Abby to answer the next question, and we're moving on to mission-focused questions.
Thanks, Larry. So the next question we received was, what do you feel is an effective length for a mission statement? We often feel ours may be too wordy. So we really encourage organizations to take a good look at their mission statements and to develop short, concise statements that don't have jargon, don't have buzzwords, and don't use acronyms. So we've been working, again, Mike mentioned we've been working with Florida Cultural Group or Manatee Performing Arts Center, and they've recently developed a good one that we thought we would use as an example. So their new one is, the mission of the Florida Cultural Group is to create, entertain, and strengthen an artistic, thriving, curious, and creative community by bringing people together. So fairly short, fairly, exactly to the point, what they do and why they do it, and avoid any jargon or buzzwords. So we would really challenge your team to create a short version of your mission statement and then a long version as well. So one that is 10 words or less that gets right straight to the point, and then one that has 1 or 2 sentences, but that aren't run on as well. And so think about developing 2 different kinds of mission statements. The real test is if your team members and your stakeholders, so your CEO or executive director, your board, your staff, your volunteers, can easily articulate your statement without having to read it. So we encourage you to test it out and see if they can do that. Are there any questions or comments about that? Okay, great. So not seeing any, I will turn it back over to Mike.
I just have a question. Maybe we can ask for a show of hands. How many of you are in organizations where you feel like your mission statement needs help? That they're either long, they're cumbersome, or use, sort of too much language to describe what you do. Show of hands. Okay. So we certainly see a few hands that have gone up, and again, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to look at, to refine, to work with your board and your staff to identify language that might just be, stronger, more concise, and perhaps more easily articulated. If you find yourself having to look at your website or look at a document to sort of recite or articulate your organization's mission statement, it might be time to look at refining.
I'll add one thing to that, Mike. I ran an organization a number of years ago, and there was 45 staff and 7 board members. When I took over, I brought them in individually and asked them, what's our mission statement? I had 45 different responses from our staff. And I said, if we're confused about who we are and what we do, think about how the community is feeling. So just a thought. Make it short, make it concise, and make it usable.
Right. And then I think, again, just to go back to what we said during webinar number 1, remember, all your products, programs, activities should tie directly to your mission. So a test, part of that process that we introduced, that step-by-step process, is to look at all your programs one by one and really put them through that test. How do they relate back to the mission, and how are they delivering against that mission? Okay, we're going to go on to the next question. So this one is, how is everyone being innovative in their fundraising? So in a moment, I want to ask for some of you to share how you're being innovative in your fundraising, but I will offer up that with organizations that we work with, we've seen lots of unique and innovative ways of fundraising over the past year. So we've seen everything from online galas, Zoom annual meetings. A number of organizations have set up virtual tours on their websites of their organization, if you have one that lends itself well to that. We've seen Facebook fundraisers, we've seen Zoom appeals. We've had an organization that's done a virtual fun run as a fundraiser. Our friends at Charlotte County Habitat for Humanity did that over Thanksgiving. We've seen virtual experiences, lots of them, an online cooking class or demonstration. We've seen online concerts. Mayor's Feed the Hungry is a perfect example. We've seen online happy hours. We've seen a TED Talk fundraiser, and we've seen lots of virtual raffles and contests. So no shortage of innovative fundraising opportunities. Any of you want to share any fundraising type activities that you've done that have been innovative or different? Feel free to raise your hand, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself. Anybody? Nobody.
I think Jennifer Bowser, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, we also did a virtual 5K. Wasn't as great of a fundraiser as we would typically do, but it kept our streak alive, basically, and we're hoping to do it in person this year. I think it was our 10th year, and we had to do it virtually, but the sponsors were still very responsive, and we did get our sponsorships out of it. We just didn't have a lot of participants. So hopefully this year it'll be in person and we can get back to normal.
Jennifer, what organization are you with?
I'm with DeSoto County Habitat for Humanity.
Ah, okay, good. Thank
It's
you.
good to see somebody from DeSoto joining us.
Yes,
It doesn't happen very often.
welcome.
Glad you're here.
Anybody?
We're all pretty busy.
Right. Anybody else have an innovative fundraiser or activity? Ann Heller.
Yes, I'm not sure it was innovative, but we did the Giving Day, National Giving Day online, and we popped that out, and we raised $10,000 that day. So that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Wow.
Excellent.
Yep.
And you're with Take Stock Manatee?
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Good. Melissa, you're on mute.
I think our fundraising chairman, Linda Calvert, could probably explain this better, but we have an annual luncheon, which usually involves over 200 people coming and is a huge fundraiser for us. This year we did it virtually, where we had a program that you watched on Zoom. And if you sent in your ticket money or whatever donation, you got a gift card to Panera so that you could bring your lunch in and have a lunch while you were watching the program. And we still maintained our large sponsors that always sponsor things at our luncheon. But I thought the bringing in of Panera lunch was a kind of unique little idea.
Great idea. Really like that. Thank you for sharing that. You're with who, Melissa?
I'm with Samaritan Counseling of the Gulf Coast.
Got it. Thank you. Anybody else have an example to share? If not, let's go on to the next question. Larry.
So here's the next question that we got. What have been the pitfalls other organizations have faced in bringing their mission to the forefront during COVID-19 in messaging and programming and fundraising, et cetera? So it's a good question. And, you know, we always say you want to keep your mission in the forefront, no matter what. It's all about your mission. Keep it front and center. But that being said, it really depends on when we were going into the pandemic, were you already in survival mode? Were you in a maintenance mode? Or were you in a thriving mode? And that played itself out more dramatically as the year moved forward. So what we saw was, you know, in many organizations, their programs ended or were placed on hold. Staff were eliminated or furloughed, and hopefully some of them came back. I believe all of you hopefully got PPP funds, maybe both rounds, and were able to cover those staff. Some volunteers stopped volunteering, and we know a lot of our client partners haven't got all their volunteers back yet because many of their volunteers are over the age of 70 and they're still concerned about being face-to-face with folks. And, you know, some donors pulled back a bit, but we still found, even in the Giving Challenge last year, they raised more money than ever. So, you know, there was some donors came forward and they realized that you needed the resources and they provided more, and others were concerned about maybe their own resources and they pulled back just a bit. But over time, you know, we believe those pitfalls result in helping you move forward with that cope, adapt, and innovate. So, you know, that's, you know, some of the pitfalls. All of you have kind of played through the cope, adapt, and innovate over the past year. You dealt with some of those pitfalls, you know, and hopefully that answered a bit of your question, whoever asked that. So, good. The next category is communications. And I would like to turn it over to Abby.
Thanks, Larry. So I'd like to ask, or a participant asked, if they're interested in knowing if most participants have also had increased involvement, support, and communication with their board of directors working through the pandemic. So has the board been more involved, the same level of involvement, or less involvement? So I'm going to provide a little bit of detail, and then we're also going to open up that question for any thoughts or comments from you all. So we've seen it both ways during the pandemic, both more involvement from the board and less involvement. So on the more end, there have been a lot of organizations who have had increased participation by their boards, because Zoom, you know, you can get on it pretty easily and communicate from wherever you are. So Zoom allows for easy, convenient access and involvement. And so board members and staff really were able to take advantage of this platform and connect more easily. Some board members have really stepped up and offered participation and support well beyond what they offered in the past, because they knew, you know, they recognize the challenges that nonprofits are facing at this point. And so they were able to offer increased support and assistance. On that end, we have seen some organizations who have almost seen too much involvement by the boards. So, you know, the boards have become involved with the day-to-day operations of the nonprofit. And there have been some members who have stepped in beyond what their appropriate roles as board members might be. So we've seen it on the, you know, they've offered some, and then they've offered almost too much. And then there have been organizations as well who have seen decreased involvement by their boards. So, you know, if you have members who aren't technologically savvy and, you know, don't really, you know, aren't interested in learning more about it, or they feel too removed due to virtual meetings, they just rather gather in person. So it's a scale of how, you know, there have been some organizations with more involvement from board and some with less. So that's kind of what we've seen, but we're very, you know, we're curious, and we're open to hearing what you all have experienced with your boards during this time. So any thoughts on that question? I think Military History Museum. I don't see your name. Sorry, sir. Go ahead and unmute. Oh, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Rex, and I'm president of the board of the Military Heritage Museum. It has been my goal to get every single member of the board active during this situation. And I have found by doing that, I moved away a little bit from talking about big projects to making even the smaller projects, or dividing the projects so that more people can be directly involved. And I think it seemed to work quite well, you know. So at every board meeting, I try to give every single board member, I call on every single member and give them a chance to talk about what they're doing and try to get their ideas and get comments on other people's, just like we're doing here today. And I think it has worked very positively.
Well, that's great, Rex, giving everyone, you know, seeing that everyone has a role to play, and that each of those roles is very important to the success of your organization, of the museum. That's great to hear. Any other comments? I think I saw Marlene.
I'm with Samaritan Counseling, the board president. I would say that our board attendance, although it's always been good, was even better with Zoom. It's so much easier to get up in the morning and just come to your screen or whatever, or if people work. And we do have some people on our board who work. Our board members are all involved on a committee of one variety or another: fundraising, governance, luncheon, whatever we do, personnel. And so they have all been active in helping to make decisions for the organization, but I don't believe that they have tried to micromanage or to be intrusive. I think they've pretty much just continued what they had been doing before. So I've been pleased with it. I don't believe in micromanaging our executive director or our staff, and I think that the rest of the board pretty much feels the same way.
Yeah, that's great to hear. That's good to hear, Marlene. Keep the board members involved, and, you know, encourage that active involvement through Zoom and people being able to access Zoom easier, but also make sure your executive director and your staff are strong and good at, you know, if they're good at what they do, there's not really a need to micromanage. Anyone else? Deborah?
Yes, the silver lining for us, one of the good things about COVID is the emergence of Zoom. A lot of our board members are all over the country, so we would see them once or twice a year when they flew in for a meeting. So they didn't feel really engaged with the mission. So we started adding Zoom meetings. They get to talk to the staff. They see photos of the lemurs and videos. And going forward, we're going to add more meetings in that format. And it's been good for the staff too, because they can directly communicate with the board more regularly. We get a lot of positive feedback, and the board goes away feeling a lot more energized and connected to the mission. So we're really pleased with what Zoom's done for us in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'll be really interesting to see how we can combine virtual and in person moving forward and kind of optimize both channels, you know, once we get past, you know, this pandemic. I think we have time for one more, Mike.
Abby, I see Katrina's hand.
Okay. Katrina?
Hi, thank you. I'm Katrina Bellamere, the Executive Director at Parenting Matters, and our attendance has been almost 100% since we've had Zoom, which is fantastic. We cross over Manatee and Sarasota County, so cutting out that travel has been wonderful. Our staff has been really engaged. It's given us the opportunity to do more of our mission moments and share more about what's happening with the families that we're serving. Also, we've had little cohorts of our staff come together at appointed times for Zoom, and the board members can come onto those Zooms and ask questions and get to know them a little bit more without, all of those barriers. And we also have a family that we've served that's coming to our June meeting that's going to share with all of them kind of the impact in their life. So it's created some more of those opportunities and taken out some of those traveling barriers that has been really instrumental.
That's great to hear, Katrina. The strengthening of connections between the board and the staff is, that's really wonderful how a virtual platform can help foster those connections. I think that's all we have time for, but if anyone else has any thoughts or comments, please feel free to post them in the chat as well. So now I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you, Abby. I'm going to ask a quick question before I go on to the next question. So Deborah Millman, you had said that you've increased the frequency of your Zoom sessions. Show of hands, how many of you have increased the number of sessions or board sessions that you've had over the course of the past year because of the pandemic? Just show of hands. How many of you have increased your interaction with the board? Okay, so a few of you. Interesting just to note that, for some of you, if you did feel the need to interact more frequently, that can be an effective way to get the board more engaged. And just another question too, a show of hands. How many of you, for how many of you does this resonate? Thank goodness for Zoom. Show of hands. Thank goodness for Zoom. Okay, on the flip side of that, for how many of you does this resonate? I am sick and tired of Zoom. Maybe we get some of both, right? So yeah, we do hear a bit about Zoom fatigue, but yes, I think, our perspective is thank goodness for Zoom, because had we not had it when this pandemic hit, it really would have changed the way that we were able to interact with one another. So let's go on to the next question, which is, how do you reinforce messaging of the mission when the team is decentralized and also growing? So when the team is decentralized and also growing. So we sort of interpreted this to mean a couple of things. Decentralized could be in the sense that your organization is and would typically operate in a decentralized manner. We also interpreted as during the pandemic, we haven't been together physically, so we're feeling a bit decentralized in that regard. So just a few thoughts here. First of which is we can't emphasize enough, communicate with your entire team on an ongoing basis. There's no better way to make sure that folks feel a part of a team, to ensure that they understand and feel as though they're on the same page as everyone else when you are communicating together and with one another. Secondly, and we already referenced this when we talked about mission, but be sure your mission statement is clear, concise, and easily articulated, because again, mission should become a part of just about every conversation you and your team have to ensure that everyone is thinking the same way and is driving toward the same direction. Thirdly, we are big believers in having a plan. So when it comes to communications, what are you trying to accomplish? If you have some sort of communication or messaging plan, that's great. And if you're implementing it, even better. If you don't have one, it's an opportunity. So again, a communications plan can be simple. It can be a 1 or 2 pager, or it can be much more complex, a multi-page document. But the point is being thoughtful and identifying what do you want your communications to accomplish, and how are you going to accomplish it is a good next step. Point number 4 is we're big believers that you should ensure that your board, staff, and other key stakeholders understand what their role is in mission messaging. So if that is not clearly understood and folks aren't necessarily aware of kind of how they fit in, then that's an opportunity as well. We see all types of organizations, some that are much more sophisticated in their approach to communications and messaging, and others who are less so. And then of course, many that are somewhere in the middle. But again, ensuring that everyone understands what their role is in that is a benefit. So if I could just ask the question of you all, is there anybody that would like to share how you're reinforcing mission in your own organization's messaging? Anything that you're doing that might be unique or helpful for others to hear? I did hear somebody say earlier that they do mission moments. So mission moments are good. It's a good way to start meetings, Zooms, conversations, and even to go around and ask folks to give or share their own mission moment. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Anybody?
I think Rex has his hand up, Mike.
Go ahead, Rex. You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Oh, go ahead, Rex. You're off mute now.
Okay. We like everybody else have spent a lot of time thinking about different things to do, and sometimes we feel like we're a little far off, but we try to think about it anyway. But what I'm getting at is at the end of every single question, we come back and ask ourselves, does this fit our mission? Does this fit our mission? You know, and if it works with the mission, we keep on planning. If it doesn't fit with the mission, we get off that and come back. But we always come back to that key question, does this project fit our mission? Thank you.
Great.
Good, simple, practical suggestion. So thank you for sharing, Rex. Anybody else have anything to share in terms of how you're reinforcing mission in your organization?
I see Jennifer's hand, Mike.
Jennifer, go ahead.
I don't really have anything to share on that, but I would love to hear more about the mission moments. I think that's very interesting, and we could share that in many platforms. But is that a moment of where your mission actually, you accomplished your mission, or is that an opportunity to accomplish your mission?
It's a good question, Rick. Rick Yoakum from Humane Society of Manatee County. Go ahead.
We actually start each and every one of our board of directors meetings with a mission moment, and the mission moments are pulled from stories from my staff. So it gets the staff involved in understanding mission. They get to tell a story that's impactful to them. And obviously we're dealing with animals here. So every one of those stories has something to do with an animal and or the animal's human. And it's a great way to start the board meeting, and always gets the board talking right at the beginning of the meeting. And it keeps people focused again on mission, because in today's world, it's so easy to get sidetracked with COVID-19 and money that some people forget to talk about mission. So that's why it's important, I think, for every board meeting to start with a mission moment.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that,
Thank
Rick.
you.
I noticed that Katrina shared in the chat box that their mission moment at Parenting Matters is a short story of impact. So a short story, you know, something that happened that brought mission to life in a very real way. So we're going to move on, but
Mike, I just wanted to add in also in chat, David Morse mentioned the same thing about the mission moments, but he says each time a different board member presents the mission moment. So that's a
good.
little bit of a twist on it as well. Thank
Right.
you for that, David.
Yeah, yeah. So anybody can share a mission moment. The idea is to, make it a regular part of your meetings, your discussions, and your interactions. So it's just another good way to incorporate mission into the messaging, communications, and the work that you do. So we're going to go on to the next question. Larry.
A lot of questions on virtual opportunities. So here's the next question. In a pandemic world, how critical are virtual opportunities to stay engaged with constituents? And what does that look like as we move out of pandemic in this next time frame? So we believe, and I think a lot of you believe, virtual opportunities are here to stay. We won't stop doing them once everything hopefully goes back to whatever the new normal looks like. So many organizations have actually increased their opportunity with engagement and outreach with new constituents, because constituents are able to log in, watch whatever you're doing, and they don't have to drive someplace, they don't have to sign up for an event and show up and take a lot of time. We have one organization, the Neuro Challenge Foundation, that does 40 workshops a month. They were all face-to-face. Within a couple of weeks, they all went virtual, and they have greatly increased the numbers that attend those workshops because people are actively participating, and they increase their geographic reach. People from out of state are logging in and attending their workshops now. So, which then ties into they've increased their donor base because they're getting some resources now from folks even out of state that are attending their workshops. So think about that. It won't go away. It's also cost efficient and effective. Think about the dollars that you spend during a live event versus a virtual event. We believe the ROI for that is probably better. Is there anyone, maybe one person can share how they're using virtual events and what might continue in the future in their agencies? Maybe just one comment. Anybody?
William has his hand up, Larry.
Yep, William. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
we've had a number of live performances at Selby Garden and also over at the Bazaar at Apricot and Lime. And every one of those performances were filmed and put on our website as a virtual, so you could see it virtually rather than going there if you had COVID concerns.
Right. That's a great idea. Another thing to maybe add to that, William, is make sure that you're tracking the analytics of how many people are looking at that on your website, because that will give you some indication. Is it a good idea? Are people watching it? And maybe you need to do more of it because you're getting a lot of folks engaged. It will also tell you where they're coming from. There might be some folks coming from out of the geographic area. So good idea. Let's move on. I will turn it over to Abby to ask the next question.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry. So we had a question from someone who said, I would like to hear and learn more about how to leverage communication styles and channels to reach a broader audience to include statewide, regional, and national outreach. So I'll just say I come from a communications background, and you could probably spend a whole week in a week-long seminar talking about different communication strategies and platforms. But since we don't have a week, we'll go over just a very broad outline of and some tactics that we would suggest. So first things first, you'll want to identify what are your communication goals and objectives. Who do you want to reach? What's your audience? What do you want to share? Things like that. And then, do you have a communications plan? And if not, you'll want to create one to again identify some of those goals and objectives and include strategies, tactics, things like that. Then we would encourage you to fully leverage first your social media platforms. I'm sure many, if not all of you, are on Facebook, but they are free and they have a lot of potential to reach your audiences. So we've seen that LinkedIn has become a go-to platform. There are a lot of people who use LinkedIn for professional connections and also for job searching. So there are a lot of professionals on LinkedIn, and, you know, there's a role for nonprofits to play, and you might consider, you know, expanding into LinkedIn for its role in your future communications. So there's an option in addition to your other social media platforms. You know, make sure use your organization's website to communicate. So there are, I know we mentioned earlier using Google Analytics to kind of track who's coming to your website, how often they're staying, what pages they're visiting. That's really helpful. You can also use blogs to kind of communicate your day-to-day work, some of the insights from your organization, what you're doing. Those are a great outreach tool to kind of inform and engage some of your audience. And then there's a wide range of things from optimizing your search engine optimization opportunities, using eBlast to communicate, growing your subscriber database, whether that's grown organically or you purchase lists to communicate with other individuals and groups, effectively using your PR and publicity. So creating news articles and press releases, your fundraising, improving your fundraising communications, so appeals, things like that. How are you communicating with your donors? And then leveraging and optimizing some of those partnership and strategic alliances with not only other nonprofits, but with other sector organizations as well. So there's a lot there. And there's a lot more that could be said, but those are some of a very broad overview of what we would kind of recommend looking into first. Mike or Larry, anything else to add to that?
Oh, great.
I think the only thing I would add is that, we are living in this world where there is so much information out there that's being, sort of thrown at us in multiple different directions. And I think that just underscores the need to be clear about, what are you trying to accomplish with your communications, as Abby said, and then figuring out what's the best way to reach the people who you care about most and who will be most passionate about your organization and your mission. So, not taking the shotgun approach, but instead being a bit more targeted in your communication. So, Abby, thank you for sharing that. Okay, we're going to move into the next category of our questions, which we defined as more capacity building type questions. So this question is, how do we effectively build community involvement when we're a newer organization that was primarily a fee-for-service organization? So that's interesting, because usually when we work with nonprofits, it's more the other way around. So our response to this one first is that as you're trying to, build more community involvement, it's not an easily or quickly answered question. I think, the key here is that it's really a building process, and it's not going to happen overnight. So you got to have that recognition up front. But with that being said, a big part of sort of, building that community involvement piece is being very clear about and sharing your mission, as broadly as you can or should with the community, and making sure they understand what your organization's mission is. And equally important, make sure that the community sees themselves in your organization and your mission. Oftentimes we forget about that. We think more about our organization, our mission, we're pushing it out there, but making sure that you're thinking about how will the community see themselves in your organization and your mission. And then, you've heard us say this before, and you'll hear it again, but really define and understand how you want to communicate to the community and what you want to communicate to them. Also, determine who on your staff and board is responsible and accountable for that community involvement or outreach piece. Who are the faces in your organization that are out in the community actually sharing about your organization, your mission? Again, with the understanding that hopefully their presence will gain some traction in terms of building that community involvement. And then lastly, we urge you to closely sort of measure or monitor the results while you're doing all of these community building activities. See how they're going. I mean, qualitatively, are you getting people involved? Are they responding? Are they taking interest? So pay close attention to that. So that's just a little bit about how to effectively build community involvement if your organization perhaps hasn't been doing that or doing it as well as you could. Okay, Larry, we're going to move on to the next capacity building question.
Thanks, Mike. So the next question is, I would like to hear more about how to raise the bar among a mixed group of staff, volunteers, board members to encourage growth and progression in delivering on the mission and generating positive economic impact on the organization. So as Abby said before, I could spend probably a week talking about this, but we'll just do it really quickly. So you're all here participating in AMT, and that's really what the answer is, to have a plan that includes mission and economic goals. It's those goals that are really, really important. Communicate with everyone, as Mike just said. Make sure that the staff, the board, the volunteers, the donors, and other key stakeholders know what's going on, that you're constantly communicating with them. And you can encourage that creativity, collaboration, and teamwork. So don't make the decision and tell them how it's going to be. Try to encourage them to participate in that decision-making process so they can feel ownership as you move forward. Measure and monitor your progress over time, and you can tweak it, you can pivot, you can make some changes as you move forward, but do it as a team. Try not to do it as executive director or the board chair and have everyone kind of follow you along. So those are some ideas. Those are some ideas on how to get people involved. Good. Mike, let's move on to the next question.
Okay, this is one that will resonate with many of you. How does an organization survive financially and putting all of your energy into general operating versus revenue generating income activities? So this idea of when you have limited resources, how should they be spent and focused? And the second part of that is, how do we try to do both in a recovery phase post-COVID? So this is the $1 million question, because in the nonprofit sector, we've all grappled, or most of us have grappled with this over the course of the past year. So a couple of thoughts about this. If your organization is in survival mode, or if you're struggling to really understand how to effectively keep the doors open, we suggest a couple of things. And frequently, again, in the nonprofit sector, we don't like what we'll call the P word, partnership, or the M word, merging. But this idea of, can you consider opportunities for partnering, combining forces with another nonprofit organization that might offer complementary mission-focused services? So we've had several examples of organizations in our own community and in our region who, during the pandemic, have really needed to do that and have done that. Not necessarily because they wanted to do it, but they knew that that was right for the organization, for the mission, and that by combining forces with another organization, they could actually propel themselves and create something better by combining forces. So that's one opportunity, especially if you fit in that survival mode. Secondly, analysis and understanding, we believe, are critical to deciding the best way to allocate your organization's financial resources. So really taking a good look at how your dollars are being spent, and whether deploying funds for general operating and or revenue generating earned income activities, it's important to know which ones are delivering or have the greatest potential to deliver optimal mission and economic impact. So it comes back to this step-by-step process that we are and will continue to share with you as part of AMT. But putting each of your programs, services, activities, and products through the microscope, kind of deconstructing them to say which ones are going to be most effective at helping us achieve both the financial and mission impact for the organization. Also, remember that your organization can't be all things to all people. So one of the things that we're big believers in is that you actually might need to smallify, again, another one of our made up words, but smallify to get through the recovery phase post-COVID. And smallify might mean a lot of different things, but this idea of shrinking or cutting in order to stay viable, and then figuring out what that means in terms of future evolution and growth. And then lastly, we believe that if you apply the rigor, the discipline, the strategic thinking to your decision-making process, that will be a helpful tool for your organization. And again, for those of you who stick with us after we get through these virtual sessions for the consulting sprint, you'll find that to be a very helpful part of AMT. So with that, I will turn it over to Abby.
Thanks, Mike. So I know very quickly, because we want to respect your time, and it is almost 11 a.m., but we had a question about best practices for embracing change in an organization. So what are tools, what are ways to embrace change? So first, we'd recommend that you understand the situation and identify what you're trying to accomplish. You can't really embrace change without knowing what you're trying to change. Recognize throughout the process that change isn't easy. It may take longer for some to embrace change than others. And, there are going to be those who won't accept change and they might need to move on. That's okay too. Communication is key. Be very honest, forthright, and transparent throughout the process. We'd also say that the entrepreneurial spirit is critical. So stay flexible and fluid, look for different opportunities and possibilities, innovate whenever possible, try new things, course correct as you go. And, remember that you're not seeking perfection. No one is perfect. No organization is perfect. It's just important that you stay flexible and you innovate when possible. Remember to keep your mission front and center throughout the process. Make sure you're involving your team in the discussion and identifying possibilities in the decision-making process, and identifying key outcomes that you'd like to accomplish. And finally, stay positive and keep an open mind throughout your change-related process. So on that, I will turn it over to Larry.
So one last question and a very fast answer is, will there be opportunities to learn about best practices from other organizations? And the answer is yes. That's easy. That was an easy answer, right? So if you follow through, as Mike said, to the consulting sprint with us, you'll have an opportunity to meet and to share good best practices with the other organizations that will participate in that. So with that, we'll wrap up. Mike, do you want to share?
Yeah, so please stay tuned for next week for webinar number 2, same day, same time. You will receive an invitation from the Patterson Foundation for that. We're going to ask you to please register your team. We would encourage you again to bring leader, board, and staff, that team of 3, especially if you want to move on to apply for that consulting sprint. And in the meantime, if you have other questions that we weren't able to get to today, please email those to us. We will follow up with you. And of course, we will have one more Webversation that will be the culmination of these 4 sessions. So on behalf of all of us, we'd like to say thank you for joining. We appreciate your active participation in this session today, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week. So thank you all.
Bye.
See you soon.